Morning. This next story contains the name of an Indigenous person who has died. An interim report into the death of Cleveland Dodd at WA's Unit 18 detention centre has uncovered significant failures on the night the 16-year-old was found non-responsive. WA Corrective Services Minister Paul Papalia says there was a severe lack of procedural compliance, including that some staff on duty were resting or watching movies when Cleveland threatened to take his own life.
Operational procedures were not followed on the night. Record keeping was poor and not up to standard. Youth custodial officers were not carrying radios. Cleveland was not placed on arms despite making self-harm threats that evening. 2 of the 5 staff required to wear body-worn cameras on the night did not sign out their devices. It appears staff were resting or watching movies at the time Cleveland self-harmed. And Cleveland should not have remained in a damaged cell where something of this nature could occur. Individually, none of these things are acceptable. Collectively, they are disturbing and confirm the need for significant cultural change.
And the WA Corrective Services Commissioner has announced immediate changes in the wake of the interim report. The changes will include the movement of some detainees and the upgrading of staff equipment.
To date, we've been working on infrastructure works and they're just about right now for Unit 18, where we can move young people effectively and safely into other wings within the facility. This will provide greater opportunity for out-of-cell activities without compromising safety of the young people and our staff. We're also looking at the way we operate as a team. Our standards and our practices are critical. Part of that also means, as you've heard from the report this morning, that the systems we use, the equipment we use, needs to be upgraded and modernised to meet our standards.
And Gerry Georgatos is a youth justice advocate who's been providing support to Cleveland Dodd's family. He joins us now from Perth. Gerry Georgatos, welcome. So you're in close touch with the family. Have they spoken to you at all about this today?
Yes, they have. They've provided a family statement which we've forwarded. I've talked to the mother, Nadine. She's devastated. She accepts that there's the Minister for Corrective Services, Paul Papalia, has given some goodwill and acknowledged not just individuated blame, but collective responsibility, collective culpable responsibility. But they want to see changes come in the memory of their child who's gone far too soon in the bloom of life. Changes come in the lives of others who are our most vulnerable and marginalised children, but they'll believe them when they see them. They've said that words alone don't matter, and these changes should have been long implemented, as particularly reforms about program delivery that can be life transformative and not just keeping kids busy. So I've been a huge critic of Banksia Hill for a long while, but in terms of the family, they've accepted the statements that have been provided by the Minister, but they do want to see changes, not just words, and it cannot bring their child back. The grief is searing. We've been supporting in Perth 70 members of their families that have come in from all over the state of Western Australia. Most of them have returned to Meekatharra, Laverton, Warburton and Kalgoorlie, and they're preparing for the burial of their child, grandson, brother, cousin, friend on December 1.
And Gerry, what did you make overall of what the government response was today?
Too little, too late, and all too late for young one. All these calls have been made for a long, long while. I'm part of the galvanising of the class action by Levitt and Robinson lawyers with 700 plaintiffs thus far, testimonies from young ones and older ones who have gone through Banksia Hill since 1997, even though the class action is from people from since 2005, and there's 700 already on that, and there'll be thousands by the time this goes through the federal court next year. The testimonies are harrowing. The calls have been long made, particularly about the restorative, the rehabilitative, the redemptorist, the helping of these young ones to transform their lives, and put in also post prison support, because it's a prison. It's not a juvenile detention facility. It's a child's prison. It's a hovel of human misery. It's a corral. It's a holding pen. And Banksia Hill hasn't improved, so I don't make much of that. An extra hour out of cells in lieu of the fact that last year, on average, there were 3 hours of out-of-cell time. Whether they've got 4 or 5 hours is still a disgrace. It's still diabolical. And the culmination to it was from the stir-crazy existence they were having at Banksia Hill in Canning Vale, in the one only juvenile detention centre in West Australia, was Unit 18. The stir-crazy rebellious kids that were actually crying out for help are finished up there. And these 11 kids that remain in there at this time, they need to be immersed in psychoeducative and psychosocial supports. They need to be supported. If we can't nurture 11, 12 kids at any one time on an individuated basis, equivalent to what a family setting or a carer setting would be on the outside, then we've got no way forward. I will say it clearly. I've worked inside Banksia Hill for 8 weeks during the quarantine in WA in 2020, from late March of 2020 to May 22 of 2020. In 8 weeks, I did a lot of transformative work, reduced the prison population of the female child prisoners by more than half, from 18 to 7 on our last day, worked with 30 out of the 31 prison entrants in the turnover of that time, and de-escalated every incident, potential incident in that prison facility in those 8 weeks. The staffing levels were there at their lowest ever, so it doesn't wash that this is about staffing levels. We had the lowest staffing levels ever, but we had the greatest peace and tranquility and program delivery and completion of paroles, and the Children's Court supported every child I applied for their release. Right,
now, Jared, I'd like to take you to a couple of the specifics of what was found in this inquiry and just get your immediate response to them. One of the issues was some prison officers resting or watching movies on the night that Cleveland was found unresponsive.
Abominable. These practices have been said to occur many times over by many detainees and youth, children, prisoners, and also by adults in adult prisons. But the evidence has now come forward, or whatever, that this has been corroborated by what the ABC has discovered, and it's abominable. It's an abomination. It's a hideous reprehension.
Okay, so that the camera was in Cleveland's cell or unit was covered with toilet paper for, I think it was 12 hours.
And the process that needed to be followed was, as soon as someone covers something, you go in there immediately. The response is actually ASAP urgent. It should be a call for a cry to help, and you go in there immediately. You cannot second guess whether someone's going to attempt or not attempt. And this is the haphazard mentality of far too many for far too long.
Yeah,
but Joe, the most disturbing one of all is the fabrication of the welfare checklist, that had been done ahead of time. The 15-minute cell checks to see that everybody's okay. In case of the young one, and obviously all the others that night, they had ticked the boxes all the way to 6 a.m. The boy was in critical care at a hospital from 2:30 a.m. that morning after he was found, and till 6 a.m. But the boxes had been ticked till 6 a.m. That is just shocking. It's beyond disturbing. It's indescribable.
What about the fact that some of the staff were not carrying radios?
No-brainers, basic 101s, system failures galore, but, you know, if it was happening that night, it's been happening for a long while, and it explains why a lot of them are going stir-crazy and they're all alone screaming out for help, and the only response is to then kids that are in these cells for 22 to 23 to 24 hours a day are then 3-point shackled, ankle cuffs and handcuffs and the chain from between both. It needs a special Royal Commission. Malcolm Turnbull called one after the Four Corners report into Don Dale of things that happened in Don Dale between 2010 to 2014. In 2016, he called a Royal Commission. It happened. Ashley has had a Royal Commission in Tasmania, Ashley Juvenile Detention Facility. It's worse. It's much worse. It's more of a systemic misconduct and not just failures of systemic practice, but misconduct of a criminal nature. And it needs to actually be a special Royal Commission. It's got to be taken out of the hands of Western Australia, and a federal government has to intervene, as did Malcolm Turnbull in 2016.
And Gerry, did you know Cleveland yourself?
I had never met Cleveland. I had known most of the Unit 18 kids. They're not monsters. They're not bad kids. They're kids that have never had a chance from the beginning of life. I was there when he passed his last breaths. I saw his mother and father, his father's only child and his mother's eldest child of her 6 children. I saw when he was pronounced passed at 10:14 p.m. on that Thursday night of October 19. The cries, the wails, his mother and father collapsed on his chest. I was standing there at ICU. It broke the heart. They forged as one, and that's a memory I'll keep with me forever. But for the family, they fell on their knees. The grandmothers, the aunts, the siblings fell on their knees, and their wails carried through down the corridor to the waiting room where there were 40 others waiting. And they realised what was happening, what the cries meant, and the wails I could hear from both ends. But, you know, the young one, his mother has actually asked me to show a painting of his. That was his last piece of work while in Unit 18. That was passed to her from a guard that got it out and given to her recently. This was the last piece of artwork of a young one. And his mother wants you and his family wants you to know, and the nation to know, the capability of this child. The capability. Can you see it on screen?
Yeah, Gerry, we can see that now. And so Cleveland was an artist.
He was many things. He was a kind and loving sibling. He was a kind and loving son. The most part of his life was spent on country. The most part of his life he'd been, you know, never in any trouble whatsoever. He went a little bit wayward in his mid-teens, and what he needed was support. Like I said, there's nothing restorative, rehabilitative and supportive in Banksia. I've seen it with my own eyes. If it had been, he would have been supported. If it had been, he'd have an outcome. And if I may say, his father, as a teenage relationship with the mother, they were teenage sweethearts. He was also in Banksia between 205 to 208 as a young person, and 8 months of the 9-month pregnancy, 8 months of that pregnancy to young one, he was in Banksia Hill. If the failures of Banksia Hill are not recent phenomena, the failures of Banksia Hill are intergenerational. The failures of Banksia Hill, from the beginning of its establishment, it was intended as a rehabilitative facility, but it never became that. There's some myth-making about the past that it was better. It has always been 60% of kids go into adult incarceration on average from Banksia Hill's Unit 18 because of the compounding trauma, cumulative and grotesque trauma of various forms. What we've heard here today or whatever, right, to your listeners, viewers, of 22 hours in a cell for days on end and then shackled up, and the deprivations from that. 100% of them will go into adult incarceration. 100% of them will go into adult incarceration. In case of young one, he has met a worse fate than otherwise. May his spirit and soul rest, but it shouldn't have been this way. And
Gerry, yeah, if we could just get you to hold Cleveland's last piece of art again and just hold it a bit higher and explain for us what Cleveland's family said to you about this and why they wanted you to do this.
Because they wanted to show his kind and loving nature, his peacefulness, the fact that he lived most of his life on country. He wasn't a child from the big city. He was a child from Laverton, from Meekatharra, from Kalgoorlie. He was a child that, you know, whose last days free were on Meekatharra, and whose earliest years were spent in Laverton, on desert country, on what they say are the children of the sunrise, and who his family said, we walk this earth peacefully. And he was a kind and loving child that loved nature, that loved music, that loved being with others, and he wanted to know his heritage. And it comes through in this painting. It's eloquent colours, it's bright, it's optimistic, it's vibrant, and this is the last remaining actual item of work that he had created from a young one past.
Okay, Gerry Georgatos, thanks so much for talking to us from Perth.
Thank you, Joe.